What's the hardest thing you've had to forgive, or never could?
I was halfway through my morning coffee when the story popped up, a short video with my cousin's voice in the background and my mother doing that laugh she saves for public moments, the kind that sounds generous and warm if you do not know her like I do. And there they were as usual, my brother holding a drink, my aunt already telling a story with her hands, my father in the center like he always is, everyone sunburned and pleased with themselves, and what landed in my stomach like a small stone was not the vacation itself, or the picture of the rental house, or the clinking glasses, or even the familiar feeling of being left out. It was the absence of the yearly lie. Because every single year since I was in my mid-20s there has been a half invitation that was never meant to be accepted, a casual message that arrived after flights were booked and rooms assigned and meal plans decided. A polished little line that said, "We wish you could make it, but we know you are busy," and this time there was nothing, not a fake invite, not a polite excuse, not even a performative text with a little heart at the end, just silence, like I had finally graduated from optional to invisible. I watched the video twice because I kept telling myself maybe I had missed something, maybe there was a text from my mother buried somewhere, maybe an email with my name spelled wrong so it never reached me. And as I scrolled back through our messages, I saw birthday reminders and forwarded recipes, and a photo of my brother's new grill that my mother captioned with 3 exclamation points, because that is how we mark pride in my family, with loud consumer moments. And it would be dishonest to claim I was surprised because patterns repeat for a reason, but even when you expect the hit, it still knocks the wind out of you, and in that moment I understood something simple and ugly, which is that they had finally decided their little performance was unnecessary, that the annual courtesy was a waste of their time, and that I would either keep quiet or I would not, but either way they were going to the beach. There are people who tell you to let things go because holding on poisons you, and that advice sounds tidy when it comes from the right voice, but what it usually means is keep your mouth shut so nothing gets uncomfortable. And I have done that for years because my family has a talent for rewriting history in real time. So if I point out that I was left out, they say I am sensitive. If I bring up facts, they call me dramatic. And if I try to fix it, they tell me I make things complicated. So this year I decided not to ask for a seat at a table that has been measured without me for a long time. And while I was sitting at my kitchen counter looking at everyone clapping for a cake I was not there to taste, I started thinking about something I heard once in a podcast about leverage, how some people do not change until the cost of staying the same gets higher than the cost of admitting they were wrong. You know, I have been building this little speaking side hustle for a while, nothing glamorous, no big stages, mostly community groups and workshops at co-working spaces where the coffee is always burnt and the projector never connects on the first try. And even though my mother calls it my hobby because if it is not on television it does not count in her universe, I have been getting better at it, clearer, more confident, more useful to people who are trying to change jobs or start small projects or just get out of their own head. And I realized something very basic about my family that I have known all my life, which is that they calibrate respect by public validation, that a stranger clapping matters more to them than a daughter trying. And once I admitted that to myself without bitterness, just as a fact of how they operate, the idea came together like it had been waiting in a drawer labeled obviously. I looked up the cost of a digital billboard because I once saw a lawyer buy one near the courthouse to make a point during a scandal, and I learned that it is not cheap, but it is not impossible either. That if you pick your dates carefully and you know which corner gets traffic from the airport, you can put almost anything on a giant screen for a short stretch of time. And I learned that if you do it cleanly and you do not slap a trademark or a logo you do not own, it is just advertising, not a crime. And if there is one thing my family cannot ignore, it is a big sign that tells the world what to think. So while they were posting a group selfie with a caption about tradition and togetherness, I was reading terms and conditions and talking to a board sales rep who wanted to know if I had artwork ready. I know how this sounds, like a stretch, like a stunt, like something a petty person would do because she cannot get over a vacation, and maybe that is exactly what it is, but I am telling you I felt calm while I was planning it, not heated or reckless. More like I had chosen a plan that translated my hurt into a language my family speaks, and it felt almost clinical to click through the booking form and upload a headshot and type a line that would make my mother's heart stop and my brother's. jaw tense, and my aunt launch into a speech about legacy and potential, because if there is one stage they cannot resist, it is the kind that lights up a city block. I kept my phone face down for most of the day and worked. Then I went for a very long walk and rehearsed what I would say if anyone asked me a direct question. And the more I practiced, the more I realized I did not actually owe anyone an explanation, because they have never given me one beyond "we figured you were busy." And it was at that point that something shifted in me. A kind of quiet that felt like a decision rather than a mood. And when the confirmation email arrived and I saw the time, slot, and the location, and the mock-up image, I laughed, not loud, just enough to recognize myself, and I thought, all right then, if you're going to treat me like I am not there, I will become the thing you cannot stop looking at even when you pretend not to care. I did not post anything. I did not text anyone. I did not hint, because the point was not to brag or to fish for questions. The point was to let the sign do the work I could never get done in a living room where everyone talks over me. And I went to bed early that night because I wanted a clear head for the morning, and before I turned off the light, I set an alarm for a time that would make sense with the airport traffic, and I placed my car keys on the counter like I was packing a small truth into my pocket. In the morning, before I even brushed my hair, I checked the live camera feed the Billboard company had given me, and the screen was black in that final second before a new ad loads, and I felt the pulse in my neck like a drum in another room, steady and close. And then it came up, my face and my name, and a sentence that was technically not a lie, and yet absolutely not the kind of thing my family was prepared to see. And I knew exactly where they would see it and exactly when, because their return flight was scheduled for late afternoon, and their route home cut straight through downtown like it always has, and it was in that moment, looking at my own smile 15 feet high, that I thought, fine, let's see who calls first. And that is where I will leave it for now, because the first call did come, not from who you think, not with the words you expect, and if you want to know what I said and what I did next, you have to hear how the sign worked on strangers long before it reached my mother, because that part turned out to matter more than I planned. The first call came from a number I did not recognize, a woman who introduced herself in a quick, cheerful way that told me she spends most of her day solving problems for people and smiling through it. And she said she managed programming at a downtown co-working space that also hosted community events, and she had seen the billboard on her way in, and before I could decide how to play it, she said, "Look, I do not know what "tonight at TED" means exactly. And I am not asking for a backstage pass. I am just saying if you need a room with chairs and a microphone, I can make that happen by early evening." And there was a pause where I could feel the hinge of the whole thing, and I said, "I appreciate you calling. I am not at liberty to discuss the details of tonight, but I am collecting interest for a talk on building leverage when you do not have a last name that opens doors. Would your space be interested in that next month?" And she laughed and said, "Not only interested, but hungry." And by the time we hung up, she had sent me a simple agreement with a date, a room, and a fee that was more than any of my past workshops by a distance that made me sit down and breathe. I am telling you this because it matters that the first person who believed I had something worth hearing was not my mother or my brother or my aunt with the big opinions. It was a stranger who saw a sign and connected it to a need she already had. And I realized that if I kept my answers clean and brief and always pointed forward, I could let the billboard create a halo without promising anything I could not deliver, which is exactly what my family has done for years in reverse, implying inclusion and delivering exclusion. And the symmetry of that did not feel petty, it felt fair. So I built a small structure around the noise, not flashy, not deceitful, just professional enough to keep momentum moving toward something real. I changed my voicemail to a warm message that said I was currently in prep for a series of talks and that media inquiries should use a specific email address. Then I created that email address and attached a short auto reply that thanked them for reaching out. Clarified that details about any upcoming appearances would be shared on my site, and invited them to register interest for a workshop on career pivots and public speaking confidence. And I kept the language plain because I was not trying to trick a reporter or fake a credential. I was trying to meet the moment with a door that swung open in the right direction, and within an hour the inbox started to populate with small questions that added up to a picture I had never seen attached to my name. People asking for slides or a topic list or a quote about nerves and self-doubt, and as I answered calmly, one by one, I felt the temperature in my chest drop from hot to steady. There is a point in any long pattern where you start to believe you have misread the whole thing, and that point arrived when I got a text from a woman who used to sit 3 desks from me at my first job, someone I have not spoken to in years. And she wrote to say she saw my face at the light on 3rd and Main and almost missed the green because she was yelling, and she added that she had always thought I was the smartest person in those endless meetings where nothing got decided, and would I consider speaking at a women's network she had joined at her new company. And I sat there wanting to cry and also wanting to laugh because it was so ordinary and so rare at the same time. That simple expression of respect I had been budgeting for like it was a luxury item, and I wrote back yes, and I meant it in a bigger sense, yes to her event, yes to momentum, yes to being seen on my own terms. You asked what my revenge looked like in the early hours, and the truth is it looked boring, which is why it worked, because while my family has always measured triumph by how loud it sounds, I have learned that the quiet decisions shape the outcome. So I drew up a 1-page landing form that asked for a first name and an email and offered 2 options, one for future talks and one for coaching, and I linked it under a button on my site labeled "Learn more about the talk everyone is asking about." And nowhere did I use a trademark or promise a stage I did not have. I simply invited curiosity to become contact, which is something my family never does because curiosity terrifies them. And the very act of saying "ask me a real question" felt like knocking down a wall I did not build, but had been staring at for years. By late morning, the Billboard feed had cycled enough times that I started seeing screenshots appear in local Facebook groups and in a neighborhood forum where people argue about parking, and the comments had the usual mix of cynicism and cheerleading, which I expected, but tucked between the noise were 3 notes from small business owners asking how to book me, and one of them included a short line that stuck to me like a magnet. It said the message feels like permission, and I thought about all the times my family withheld permission as a way to maintain their center of gravity, and I realized I was finally doing something I had waited for someone else to do, and that realization calmed whatever anger was left like water on a low flame. I kept my silence with the family because I wanted the timing to be clean, and to keep myself honest, I wrote a simple document called Boundaries and Consequences where I listed what I would and would not say once the call started. Because I know myself and I know how quickly you can get pulled into their version of events, and at the bottom I wrote a line that felt like a hand on my shoulder. It said you are not obligated to make anyone comfortable with the fact that you are no longer playing your old part, and that sentence stayed in my head when my aunt finally chimed in on Facebook with a congratulations under a screenshot that someone else had posted, pretending like she had known all along and using my full name as if her blessing had always been attached to it. And as my fingers itched to reply, I closed the app, because my revenge in that moment was not to correct her. It was to deny her the attention she wanted to harvest from me. Around noon, the co-working manager emailed again to say a local radio producer had asked for an introduction, and I said yes and kept my answers crisp when he called, offering a short quote about building a platform when traditional gatekeepers have never heard of you. And he said, "This is timely. The station loves stories about people making their own lane. Can we record a quick segment this afternoon?" And I agreed, and then set a time that I knew would directly overlap with the hour my family usually lands and drives home from the airport, because I was done arranging my day around the hope that they would remember I exist, and as small as that scheduling choice sounds, it felt like flipping a breaker. The first family ripple arrived not as a call, but as a screenshot texted by my cousin. No greeting, just the Billboard photo with a single line, "Did you forget to tell us something?" And I looked at it long enough to let the old reflex surface. The one that wants to perform calm and explain everything and make it easier for them to swallow a reality they did not create. And then I set the phone face down and walked into the radio station lobby to do the interview about making a seat when you are not offered one, and that felt like the right answer to a question they had never asked in good faith. When I came out, there were 3 missed calls from my mother and 1 voicemail that began with my full name and a tone I have known since childhood. The tone that says I am already guilty for not smoothing something over she broke, and I listened without reacting. Because the revenge for that tone was not yelling back, it was holding the line I had drawn without apology, and before I could decide whether to call her, my phone buzzed with an email from someone whose title made my hands go cold. A coordinator for a local TEDx that I had never heard of, asking if we could talk today about a potential slot in the fall, and I stood very still in the parking lot with the sun hitting the pavement, thinking that maybe the sign I bought to rattle a small circle had just knocked on a larger door, and that is the moment I decided to let my mother wait, because I wanted to see who I could be if I did not sprint toward her panic. I will tell you what I wrote back and what happened when they finally drove past the billboard and called while I was in another meeting, but you should know first that the next move was not about proving anything to them. It was about locking in an opportunity that did not require their approval, and that is exactly what I did before I picked up the phone and heard my mother say the name she only uses when she wants me to abandon myself. Before I called my mother back, I answered the email from the TEDx coordinator because I promised myself that any door that opened because of this chaos would be walked through before I went home to explain myself to people who had already decided who I was. So I wrote a clean reply that laid out a possible talk in plain language about being excluded from rooms you are qualified to be in and the practical steps you take when the invitations never arrive, and I attached a short outline I had been refining for months without knowing exactly where it belonged, and within minutes she asked if we could jump on a quick call to talk timing and topic fit, which I took in my car outside the station while the billboard cycled above the traffic like a metronome. And she said she had seen the sign and also heard the radio segment, and what stood out to her was not the billboard, but the way I avoided hype and kept talking about systems and personal agency, and could I send a draft title and a 2-paragraph description today for the curation team, and I said yes, then yes again when she asked for a short video sample to prove I could hold a room. And as I hung up, I felt that small pleasant shock of something real locking into place where a fantasy usually sits. By the time I finished those emails and recorded a 2-minute clip on my phone in a quiet parking lot, the flight tracker app told me my family's plane had landed, and I could picture the choreography without effort because it is the same every year. My father marching ahead as if he is late for a meeting even when he is not, my aunt gathering the bags like a stage manager on opening night, my mother adjusting her voice for whatever audience is nearest, and I thought about the exact turn they would take onto the downtown ramp, the one that would carry them past the corner where my face appeared every few minutes with the line that had startled half the block, and I realized that what I wanted was not a confrontation. It was a quiet rerouting of power where I was no longer the one asking for a seat at a table I would never be offered, and the simplest way to do that was to continue doing my work as if their approval had nothing to do with it. The missed calls multiplied while I was writing the description for the curation team, and the voicemail from my mother started with my first and middle name in that clipped register that tells you a verdict has already been reached, followed by a rush of questions that were not really questions. Did you lie? Did you trick people? Did you steal someone's brand? What are you trying to prove? And even as it tightened my shoulders, I heard the old pattern underneath it, the expectation that I would hurry in to soothe and explain and absorb her fear, and instead I opened a new note on my phone and wrote 3 sentences I could use if I answered. The first one said, "I am not available to discuss logistics right now." The second said, "In the coming weeks there will be public information about talks, and you are welcome to attend like anyone else." The third said, "I will not debate my choices," in a raised voice, and while it looked stiff on the screen it felt like air in my lungs. I finally picked up when she called again because I wanted the record to reflect that I was reachable and calm, and when she launched into the part about how humiliated she felt driving past a giant sign with my face and not knowing what it meant, I said evenly that I had felt humiliated for years watching their vacation posts arrive like announcements from a club that had lost my application, and she told me not to be dramatic, and I said I was being specific, and she switched to the tactic where she casts herself as a worried mother who just wants to protect me from embarrassment, and I said I appreciate your concern and I am making careful, legal choices. And she asked in a sharp voice whether I was actually speaking at the thing on the sign this very night, and I said I am not discussing that, and I suggest you wait and see what unfolds, and she said that sounded evasive, and I said it sounded like a boundary. And when my brother jumped onto the call from the car's speaker and tried To play the reasonable one by asking if this was some internet stunt that would blow back on the family name, I said the family name has survived far worse than me running my mouth into a microphone, and the silence that followed was so clean I almost smiled. If you are waiting for a screaming match, you will be disappointed, because I did not give them one. What I did instead was use the same voice I use with event planners when they ask for changes that are not part of the agreement, which is the only tone my family respects, that careful professional firmness that says we will proceed as discussed. And when my mother demanded to know why I had not told her first, I said, because for many years you have signaled clearly that my life events are background noise unless you can center yourselves in them, and she said that was unfair, and I said it is accurate. And then I told her I had a pre-interview to record in 10 minutes, and if she wanted to keep talking we could do it tomorrow during the window I had open, and she sputtered at the word window like I had charged her a fee. And I ended the call with a polite, I have to jump, we will talk soon, and I sat there with my hands steady on the wheel and realized that the act of not explaining was the first real revenge I had taken in years. I went inside and recorded the quick pre-interview for a local morning show, the kind where they ask you for 3 bullet points that make a tidy segment, and I framed it as a conversation about how to move when gatekeepers have never heard your name. And the producer asked casually whether the Billboard had been a publicity play, and I said it was a message to myself that I am done waiting for permission, which is the truth, and then I opened my laptop in the lobby and bought a small extension of the ad buy that would run for 2 more days at the same corner during the evening commute, not because I needed to rub anything in, but because I wanted to make sure the city said my name a few more times while I translated the attention into bookings and a better rate sheet. And the minute the order processed, I felt that satisfying click of a decision that serves the plan and not the argument. On the way home, I stopped for a coffee I did not need and listened as 2 people in line wondered out loud who I was and whether there was a real talk tonight. And the younger one said she had looked it up and found my site and joined the list because the title sounded like something she needed to hear, and I stood there pretending to look at my phone while my eyes stung for a second. Because there is nothing more disorienting than strangers giving you the basic regard you have begged for from people who say they love you, and I decided then that any energy I had left would go toward the people leaning in instead of the people clutching their version of me like a trophy. When I reached my apartment, the group chat had finally ignited, my aunt leading with a grandiose paragraph about legacy and doors opening and how proud she had always been of my voice, which would have been funny if it had not been so calculated. And my brother firing off a single line that said, "Is this a scam that is going to embarrass us?" And my mother typing the sentence, "We are coming over to talk tonight," as if she could still declare an agenda and have it stick, and I typed nothing because the next move had to be cleaner than a reply, and while I was deciding whether to mute the thread or leave it, an email landed from the TEDx coordinator saying the curation team wanted to move forward to a virtual audition panel, and could I hold 2 dates next month? And I looked at the screen and thought, this is the point, this exact choice right here. Because the revenge that matters is picking the door to the future instead of the door back to the same room. So I chose, and that choice set off the meltdown that came next, because when I sent my mother a short calendar link with 2 available times next week and a note that said, "I am not taking visitors tonight. Please choose a slot if you would like to talk," the chat exploded in a way that made me step back and let it burn. And if you want to hear what they said and what I did with it and how I made their noise pay me, you will want to stay for what happens next. The thing about my family is that when they feel cornered, they don't step back and reflect or even try to understand how the situation got to that point. They double down, they flood the space with noise. They throw every possible accusation into the air so that the person they're targeting feels overwhelmed, confused, and guilty before they've even had a chance to answer, and that is exactly what happened within minutes of me sending that short, polite calendar link instead of opening the door to an unannounced ambush in my own home. The group chat, which on most days limps along with recipe exchanges, photos of my aunt's dog, and random forwarded chain messages about positive thinking, suddenly became a rapid-fire courtroom where every relative played both prosecutor and victim, tossing lines at me that were part wounded disbelief, part moral outrage, and part pure theatrics. My aunt was the first to react, predictably wrapping her message in a layer of performative pride that sounded generous on the surface, but was actually a setup for the next blow. She opened with a sweeping, "We're all so proud of you," which she immediately followed with, "But it's just a shame you felt the need to make such a big spectacle without letting your family in on it, especially when we could have helped." My cousin chimed in seconds later, not with congratulations, but with a passive-aggressive little dagger about how some people don't need to buy billboards to get noticed, which was rich coming from someone whose entire career is built on tagging herself in photos next to people with real jobs. My brother went for the blunt angle, writing, "Is this a scam? Because if it blows up in your face, it reflects on all of us, as if my life's purpose had ever been to safeguard the family's reputation, when they've been more than happy to exclude me from anything that might give me a shred of it." And then, right on cue, my mother entered the fray with the kind of message that reads like it's been composed and edited in her head for days, even though this was her first chance to use it. She opened with my full name, a sure sign she wanted authority, and informed me that my attitude was becoming a problem, that family is supposed to be a united front, and that my coldness was hurtful when all they were trying to do was celebrate me. She ended by saying, "We need to talk face to face tonight. This can't be handled in texts." That line was her power move, the one she's used since I was a teenager, the declaration that the matter at hand required an immediate in-person meeting, which, in practice, always meant she would control the setting, control the timing, and control the outcome by exhausting me until I said what she wanted to hear. But I've learned something over the years, and it's that you can't win a rigged game by playing it. The only way to win is to refuse to sit at that table at all. So I didn't respond with a counterargument or a defense or even a sarcastic remark, because all of those still feed the cycle. Instead, I replied with the exact same tone I'd use in a professional negotiation where the boundaries are non-negotiable. "I'm unavailable tonight. Please choose a time from the link I sent if you'd like to have a conversation." I left it at that, no justification, no follow-up, nothing for them to pick apart. The silence from my end seemed to act like gasoline on a flame, because the next 15 minutes in the chat were a blur of messages piling on top of each other so quickly the notifications barely had time to stop vibrating before the next one came in. My aunt accused me of putting on a show for strangers while shutting out the people who've known me my whole life, which made me laugh out loud in my kitchen because these are the same people who have actively worked to keep me off their own stage for years. My cousin threw in a comment about ego and insecurities, clearly hoping I'd bite back so she could claim some kind of moral victory. My brother demanded proof that the TEDx invitation was real, as if I owed him receipts before he'd consider believing I was capable of doing anything noteworthy. And my mother went for the jugular with, "I don't know who you're trying to impress, but it's not going to fill the hole you're clearly trying to fill." That was the moment I knew I'd made the right choice in not letting them through my front door that night, because no good could come from hearing that line in person. Instead of replying, I focused on something far more productive, sorting through the inquiries that had come in from the site since that morning. 3 local organizations wanted to book me for speaking engagements in the next 2 months. 2 coaching clients had signed up for consultations, and 1 journalist from a regional magazine had asked for an interview about creative self-promotion strategies in the modern economy. Every single one of those opportunities had come directly from the attention the billboard generated, the same billboard my family was treating like a personal betrayal, and I wasn't about to waste that momentum by feeding their outrage. I told myself, and I meant it, that the real revenge here wasn't the sign itself, it was the fact that their noise no longer dictated my moves. Still, as the group chat kept pinging, I realized I could make their meltdown work for me in a way that would be both satisfying and useful. I took screenshots of the most condescending, dismissive, and contradictory messages, the ones where they alternated between pretending to support me and accusing me of embarrassing them, and I filed them away in a folder I titled Material. Not to post publicly, not to shame them online, but to pull from when I needed examples for future talks about navigating environments where people want to claim your wins, but not help you earn them. It was a way of turning their attempts at control into content I could use on my terms, in rooms they'd never be invited into. By evening, the chat had slowed from a roar to a simmer, with the final word coming from my mother, "We'll let you cool off and hope you remember what's important." I didn't reply, partly because I knew what's important meant keeping the family hierarchy intact, and partly because I had an actual meeting to prepare for one with the TEDx curation team, who wanted to do an informal Zoom the next day to get a feel for my delivery. That meeting mattered. That meeting was real. That meeting was mine. And as I closed my laptop for the night, I thought about how, for the first time, I wasn't just reacting to their behavior. I was using it, shaping it into something that worked for me, letting it fuel the very opportunities they were so worried might embarrass them. The real irony, which I intended to savor for as long as possible, was that their obsessive need to respond to the billboard had only drawn more eyes toward it, which meant my name was now being mentioned in rooms that had never said it before. What they didn't know, and what I wasn't ready to tell them yet, was that the real payoff was still coming, and when it did, it wouldn't just make the billboard worth every penny, it would close the loop on every fake invitation, every passive-aggressive slight, and every carefully staged family photo I'd been cropped out of. And that moment, the one I was planning next, would make this meltdown look like a warm-up. The morning after the group chat finally burned itself out, I woke up with that rare combination of clarity and calm that usually only comes after you've made a decision you know you won't walk back from. And instead of checking my phone for whatever lingering jabs my family might have slipped in overnight, I opened my email first, because I had decided that for at least one day, my attention would be reserved for people who were actually building something with me instead of tearing at it. Sitting right there at the top of the inbox was a message from the TEDx coordinator with the subject line, "Confirmed, let's do this," and as I read her note saying the panel had reviewed my outline, loved the framing, and wanted to officially schedule me for the fall event with a full 30-minute slot, I felt that quiet rush of satisfaction that has nothing to do with cheering crowds and everything to do with knowing you navigated something in a way that was both deliberate and completely on your own terms. It's funny, because if you'd told me a month ago that a petty-seeming act like buying a downtown billboard would lead to an actual booked TEDx talk, paid speaking offers, and enough new coaching inquiries to fill my calendar for the rest of the quarter, I would have laughed and told you it sounded like the kind of fantasy people write about in self-help books that skip all the messy parts. But standing in my kitchen that morning, coffee in hand, looking at my confirmed date and the tidy little contract attached, I knew that the point hadn't just been to get attention. It had been to redirect the story of me away from the people who kept telling their own version of it without my consent, and toward the people who were willing to hear it from me directly. By noon, I'd signed the TEDx agreement, locked in 2 additional corporate workshop bookings, and confirmed a podcast interview with a host whose audience size was big enough to matter, but whose tone was conversational enough that I knew I could tell the story without it feeling like a press release. Every yes I sent out that day felt like a step further from the place where my worth was measured in how quietly I accepted exclusion, and closer to the place where my presence wasn't conditional. And while my family was still sulking in their own corner of the internet, making vague posts about attention-seeking and respect, my name was moving through circles they'd never get access to, not because I'd kept them out, but because they'd never bothered to step in. I didn't tell them about the bookings or the contract. I didn't tell them that the billboard had already paid for itself in speaking fees and coaching retainers within 48 hours. I didn't tell them that I'd been invited to a networking dinner the following week, where I'd be seated next to someone whose endorsement could open doors I'd been knocking on for years. Instead, I let them stew in the mystery, because the truth is, sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't proving them wrong with evidence. It's letting them live with the possibility that they've underestimated you so badly, they can't even guess the scope of what's happened. 2 weeks later, when the TEDx team posted the official lineup on their social channels, my name was right there in clean, bold text alongside speakers with credentials my family would trip over themselves to brag about if they knew them personally. The comments on the post started rolling in, with friends tagging each other and saying, "We have to get tickets," and strangers tagging me directly to say they were excited for my talk. I didn't even have to show it to my family, mutual acquaintances did that for me. Within an hour, my cousin sent me the link with a half-hearted, "Wow, I guess it's real," and my aunt followed with, "We knew you had it in you," which might have sounded like support to anyone else, but to me read exactly as it was. An attempt to retroactively attach themselves to something they'd had no hand in creating. And here's the thing, I didn't bite. I didn't thank them for their support. I didn't soften and say, see, this is what I've been working toward. I let their comments sit unanswered, not out of spite, but because I finally understood that their approval was not currency I needed to trade in anymore. The value of this win wasn't in their acknowledgement, it was in the fact that I had built it in the absence of it. The night of the TEDx talk came months later, and when I stepped onto that stage, I didn't tell a story about billboards or family drama or even exclusion in the way most people expected. I told a story about building your own platform when the people you thought would hand you one never do, about the choice to stop auditioning for rooms that have already decided you don't belong, and about the ways you can turn what feels like rejection into leverage. I didn't name names, I didn't point fingers, but the subtext was clear enough that anyone who'd been following the last few months of my life could read between the lines. When the video of the talk went live online a few weeks later, I know my family watched it because my mother sent a short message that simply said, "We heard you," and nothing else. For once, I didn't feel the urge to reply, explain, or defend. The billboard had been the opening move, the bookings and the talk were the middle game, and this quiet, undeniable public win was checkmate. Now, when they post vacation photos, I'm in some of them. Not because they've suddenly discovered the joy of including me, but because they've realized it's riskier not to. They've learned, in a way that no argument or tearful confrontation could ever have taught them, that leaving me out doesn't erase me, it just gives me more space to write my own headline. And that, more than anything, was the point all along. So when people ask if the billboard was worth it, I tell them the truth. It bought me exactly what I wanted. Not their love, not their approval, but their permanent awareness that I am someone they can no longer ignore. And the knowledge that I don't need to wait for an invitation to take up space. And as far as I'm concerned, that's a better return than I ever could have planned for.